Hi, welcome today to our program, The Fabric of Family, a program that's designed to address the issues that are important to your family as well as mine. My name's Barry Gilreath Jr. and I'm the host of this program, and I want to thank you for taking time in your busy schedule to be with us today. We're going to be addressing a very important subject related to the family. A number of years ago, there was a survey done that was intended to determine what actually constituted a good marital relationship. And in correspondence with this study that was done, there was a number of couples who participated. And there were a number of questions that were asked. And one of the questions that were asked in this study and survey was, who gives more in your relationship? Who gives more in your relationship? The interesting thing about it, it was determined that those couples who had the best marriage put on their answer sheet that the other one gave more in their relationship. And those that put on their answer sheet, well, I give more in my marital relationship, actually did not have as fulfilling a marriage as the other couples in the study. Well, that's very interesting, I believe, and I have two gentlemen who are with me today to discuss the subject in this program entitled, The Trouble with Us Is Me. Jeff Archie is with us today. Jeff Archie is from Cleveland, Tennessee. He's a gospel preacher. And Jeff, the trouble with us is me. Why is this important to approach our marital relationship with this mindset?
Well, Barry, first of all, you have an individual who is going to say, okay, here's a problem. They acknowledge a problem, but they begin with themselves rather than to point the finger at the spouse. They begin with themselves and say, what did I do, or what can I do to make this better? A lot of times in disagreements, we have a tendency to point the finger at someone else and blame others, whereas we could address things the right way, or we could address it in such a way that maybe the problem would not have arisen. Let me see if I can explain it this way. We were talking about studies, what they've shown in times past. It's been said that it's not necessarily the words you say, nor the expressions you might have, but the tone of your voice that really alters a conversation. And sometimes it's not what is said, but it is how it is said. And the person that says, the problem with us is me, is acknowledging in a humble way, I could have handled that better.
I think that's very interesting because, Jeff, the tendency in so many marriages or any kind of relationship when there's a problem, as you pointed out, is to point the finger at someone else. Mm-hmm. Now, Chad Dollahide is with us today. He's a gospel preacher, works with the Gospel Broadcasting Network. But Chad, in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis, we read about the account of the fall of man. And we see some finger pointing taking place in that account, do we not?
Yeah. You have, of course, God says to Adam, what have you done here? Adam points the finger and says, it's that woman you gave me. She gave it to me, and she compelled me. And then, of course, the woman then points the finger at Satan, the serpent. Of course, he doesn't have anybody to point the finger at that point. But yeah, some finger pointing going on there. Instead of saying, really, and I think we all understand this now, looking back at biblical history, the appropriate response for Adam to have made would be to say, I'm the head of this house, I fell down on my duty. Instead of just pointing the finger back at Eve. And that's what we do so many times, even down to this very day.
Why do we do that? Why do we try and take responsibility off of our shoulders and place it on someone else?
I guess it's almost like human nature, you might say. It's almost second nature to avoid. Sometimes you don't want to be embarrassed. Sometimes it's, I know many times in the workplace, you don't want to be perceived as someone who doesn't know what they're doing. And so the tendency, instead of just standing up and saying, I made a mistake. I could have handled that better, as Jeff said. We tend to say, really, this is your fault. and we point the finger at our spouse, we point the finger at a coworker, we point the finger at a sibling, maybe another member of the local congregation. This applies to so many different relationships, and we say, this is really your fault, and then we try to put some kind of a spin on it to make it that person's fault.
It's easier.
And I think that's
it's easier. I'm sitting here smiling because I think of a circumstance that happened at the congregation where I preached some months ago. I stepped out of my office. Teenage boys were in there, and when I came in, one of them was trying to get into my briefcase. And I looked at him and I said, "You looking for something?" Which there was no harm done. I said, "You looking for something?" Well, immediately he starts pointing the finger at other guys, and I just looked at him and I said, "Look, you're caught red-handed. I saw you do it. Why can't you just admit it and go on?" And I'll never forget his answer. He said, "Okay, I did it, but they made me do it." So it's easier sometimes. We're looking to pass the buck. But in relationships, specifically in marriages, it cuts too deep. And sometimes those cuts are just hard to reconcile.
And I think every counselor, anyone who served in that role in whatever capacity, whether it was a minister, whether it was a professional counselor, elder, just a friend. But in talking with an individual or a couple about marital problems, I suppose every one of us has heard the statement, well, the trouble with us is her, or the trouble with us is him. But the Bible places personal responsibility on our shoulders. Now, when we begin to look at problems and conflicts and relationships from our own perspective, does that in any way nullify what someone else may be doing or contributing to a problem?
No.
Okay, how so?
Well, it doesn't mean that any person is solely at fault. But, the old saying that I've heard so many times, read it in marriage books and heard preachers and counselors and different people talk about, is that the only person I can change is me.
And I appreciate you bringing that up because that's so true. We need to understand I cannot change anybody else. Now, I can motivate, I can encourage, I can prompt, but I can't literally change them. They have to want to change themselves. That's the way God made us. We are free will agents. We can determine what our course in life is going to be. And so when you're in a relationship, you are in a relationship with someone who may be different than you, someone who may have different values, someone who may possibly have different views about certain things. We want to encourage our spouse in the right direction. We want to prompt them. We want to be a good example for them. But ultimately, they must want to change, or they're not going to change. And so it is much better for us if we will focus upon what we can do better, while at the same time encouraging our spouse to do the same. But so many times we want to place all of the emphasis on the other person. Selfishness, I think, is a major problem in the marital relationship. What are some ways that mates can demonstrate selfishness in their relationship?
I think, first of all, it's what we call the I factor. Not I as in I, but the letter I. I would like to do this my way. I am important to do this. This is owed to me, and so on. But when we carefully read Ephesians 5, begin with verse 22 of the relationship with husband and wife, you see how Christ loved the church. The church is submissive unto Christ. Nobody forced anyone to become a member of the church. It was a choice because they could see the blessings therein. Well, in the marriage relationship, the husband looks upon the wife looks upon the husband. There is a respect there. And so our focus should be, what can I do to help her be better? And her reply would be, what can I do to help him be a better person? We take the focus off of self and we put it on the other person, which is a Christ-like attitude.
All right, so what are some ways, just very practical ways or issues? Let's think of some issues that might arise within the husband-wife relationship and how we can actually put this into practice. That is, take self out of it and look to the other person above looking to ourselves. Chad, do you have any ideas?
I think probably a common one that we see a lot in marriages is maybe recreational activity. It might be television, it might be sports. But here's a guy who loves football, and I may get to meddling here.
Watch
it. But here's a guy who loves football, and you know that's all that is ever on, and when his game is on, then what the wife wants doesn't matter. Or maybe it's a wife who has a particular program that she likes, and she refuses any kind of compromise. And too many times. We might add that the compromise nowadays is to put another television in the house and then split up. Well, that's good family time when you're in one room and the wife is in the other. That's not the solution. So many times the solution is less television, period, to be honest. But that's one example that we see. Maybe the husband likes a particular recreational activity, particular sport. He wants to go out and maybe he's gone 2 or 3 nights a week, and the wife's saying, well, you know, when are we going to spend some time together as a family? When are we going to spend some time together as a married couple? You know, there's family time with the children, and then there's couple time where it's just you and your wife. But so many times selfishness. I want to go play. I want to watch this program. I want to do this. I want to do that. As Jeff mentioned, the I factor. And I just totally, you can totally disregard what your spouse wants. And that's the problem. That's where selfishness is coming into play.
Absolutely. And so recreational activities is an area where conflict can arise, and this conflict can be dispersed if we would learn not to be selfish. But you know, there are other areas as well. Jeff?
Well, I think one, family. You know, not only within our families, the husband, wife, children, but the wife's family and the husband's family, especially around holiday time. You know, you grow up and you've done the same thing. You've gone to your grandparents, both grandparents, it just depends on per family. She has done the same thing, but when you marry, what do you do? And to confess, we had that struggle in our marriage. Not that it hurt us, but how could we spend both time until finally we decided that we love our families, but we Christmas Eve with mine, Christmas Day with hers, and this is the best that we can do. And then people, with all due respect, Barry and Chad, they have to learn to accept that. This is a husband and wife relationship. It's more precious than any relationship other than one's relationship with Christ. And we cannot afford to let anything interfere with that or, quote unquote, ruin a holiday. So we made that decision. And then that way we're able to give the time and it's acceptable. And then we can also work out other times with them as well. That is a challenge too, but we began to address it together rather than you spend more time with your parents than I spend with mine. We began to address it together and said, here's what we're going to do. The families accepted it and things are much better.
And you know, these things do arise within the marital relationship, especially those who haven't been married very long. I always, in fact, that very subject, the subject of holidays and getting together with our in-laws, I always like to address that in premarital counseling and get the couple to kind of work through some of those things before they ever say I do. It just takes away an issue that can be a source of tension and problems in that marital relationship as soon as they are married. Chad, you have something you wanted to add to that?
Well, you know, you made me think, talking about addressing things in premarital counseling. Religion is an area where there can be selfishness. We need to encourage our young people, especially our children, marry a Christian, but not just a Christian, marry a faithful Christian. Because so many times, and I know all of us here have seen this numerous times, one spouse or another in the relationship doesn't have the same priorities spiritually, and the selfishness then sets in. You know, well, honey, why don't you come to worship with me this morning? I'm not going to go to worship. I want to watch the ball game that's going to be on. We won't get home in time, or I want to sleep in. I need my rest. Well, that's all selfishness, and that's a problem. It's a problem, number one, spiritually. It's going to be a problem with God. But number two, it's going to cause problems in marriage because there's that selfishness coming out again. Instead of being a team and saying, let's have our priorities right, spiritually speaking, together. Let's bring our children up in the Lord together, and so on. But that's selfishness coming out again.
And you touch on an area here that we could put in a category and call these things urgent things. You mentioned about, I had a hard day at work and I want to sleep in this morning. My boss has got this demand on me, or I need to take care of this for the community club that I'm a part of. Things that would fall under the category of urgent things. But is there not a difference that can be made between the urgent and the really important things?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And really, where do we place our priority, or where should we place our priority and emphasis? Mm-hmm. What are some examples of some really important things?
Well, I believe really an important thing is, of course, time as a husband and wife. Time with family is important. I believe it was Lee Iacocca that made the comment, you'll never see or hear anyone say on their deathbed, I wish I had spent more time at the office. That's the first thing. And of course, we see these little things that do pop up. One thing that I do, and I spend a lot of time, and that may sound strange, time in time management. How can I be more effective? And the one thing that I've learned in studies and everything is, number one, sit down and look at your schedule and eliminate something. Today, husbands and wives need to eliminate some things. Of course, we need to work to provide for our own. That goes without saying. But we need to have those boundaries of what is important, that we're having that time with each other. And a lot of times, it's not the job problem. It is a lot of times the problems of things that we pick up on our own. Being part of a club here, a club there, or as I have had parents tell me, I no longer have a schedule. My children dictate my schedule. Yeah, right. You're still the parent. So you see that right there to just back up and say, okay, here's what we need to look at. Here's what's important, and what is urgent is what's important to keep our marriages strong.
Now, we're talking about priorities. Mm-hmm. And so when a couple is sitting down perhaps with someone and going through marital counseling, we see these urgent things. And we're not saying these urgent things have no importance, but we need to really focus on priorities. And sometimes if we're not careful, we can place so much emphasis upon the urgent things and we can neglect the things that are of the utmost importance. And so it brings us back full circle to what we were discussing at the beginning of our program. The trouble with us is me. If I'm having problems in my marital relationship, I need to look at it from the perspective of what can I do to help this to be better. That's not to say that my spouse is not contributing in any way or my spouse is not to blame, but what can I do? What can I do to make things better between me and my spouse? Because truly, the only person that I can change is me. Brethren, we've got about another minute or two left before we conclude with our program today. I just want to see if either one of you have any additional comments you would like to add.
Adding to what Jeff had just mentioned, Guy N. Woods used to say, I heard him in several sermons, not me personally, I'm a little young to have heard him, but sermon tapes. But he would often say, so many times we choose the good, but neglect the best. Sports for our children, that's a good thing. But when those sports interfere with spiritual activities, when they interfere with husband and wife's time together, we've chosen the good and neglected the best. And so often that's what we do.
Well, our time is up, and that's a good way to end the program, Jeff. Sorry I didn't get time for your final comment, but we'll have you back. But I want to thank you both for being with us. I want to thank you, as usual, our viewing audience, for taking time in your busy schedule to focus upon some things that are of the utmost importance, and that is those things that deal with life and death, those things that are eternal in nature. And certainly the family has an impact upon our soul.
Let's make the most of a minute.
Speech on
18 years
Apple
ago,
TV
Judith
remote.
Martin, a
Speech
syndicated columnist, wrote 2 books on etiquette. Ms. Manners' Guide to Rearing Perfect Children and Miss Manners' Guide to Excruciatingly Correct Behavior. Now, putting pieces in newspapers and writing 2 books doesn't necessarily make any person an authority, but she did have something good to say. When asked who is to blame for ill manners, parents or the schools, Ms. Martin replied, the parents. We've tried to dump the teachings of citizenship and manners and morals on the schools, even though they're virtues which should be learned at home. Schools should not be expected to succeed where parents fail.